So one of my favorite childhood memories is the day before Christmas. Our family of 6 would have an early dinner in this town called Marshalltown, Iowa, which was about an hour's drive from our farm. And after dinner, we would spend the rest of the evening shopping for presents for my cousins and my aunts and uncles, because everything was half price in Marshalltown, Iowa after 6 p.m. until the stores closed on Christmas Eve. And so my parents would split up this gigundo shopping list between the two of them. And my mom would usually take my sisters and I, and my dad would take my brothers, and they would have this huge shopping blitz for several hours every Christmas Eve. I remember it being a very special treat to not only eat in a real restaurant, which was very uncommon for our family, but one that would be set with white tablecloth and candlelight, and we would all be in our Sunday best. And then the excitement of all the windows of the stores that would be filled with these mechanical elves and reindeer and made up to be like, Santa's workshop, so that we could see what really went on at the North Pole. There would usually be Santa and Mrs. Claus also, in the store. I remember my brothers and my sister and I would be completely exhausted when we got home, and my mom would take the time to tuck us snugly into bed. And then we could hear the rustling of the gift wrap and the curling ribbon going on downstairs for hours afterwards, while my parents got ready for Christmas Day. And then in the morning, I would jump out of bed and run downstairs, and I would lean as far into the living room as I dared, where that sacred space with the tree and all the presents that Santa left would be. And we couldn't go into the living room. We were not allowed to go into the living room until my parents got up. There would always be freshly made, homemade cinnamon rolls rising, and my mom would get up and zip up her bathrobe and put the cinnamon rolls in to bake in the oven, and then, only then, could we go into the living room. This past weekend, I was in Minnesota at my mom's house for Thanksgiving, and I mentioned to her, as we were talking about the things that we were thankful for, I told her how thankful I was that she had given us these cherished memories of Christmas. It was such a time of wonder, I said, such a time of wonder. And she laughed at me. She said, "A time of wonder? I hardly remember Christmas. I was so exhausted." She said, "Don't you remember how we used to have to go shopping every Christmas Eve? And because everything was cheaper then? Don't you remember how awful that was? Don't you remember how one of you would always cry because you didn't get what you wanted? And don't you remember that one Christmas that Sadie, our dog, ate all the fudge because one of you left it on the coffee table when we went out for dinner? And don't you remember your uncle getting drunk on the eggnog almost every Christmas Day and making a fool of himself?" Well, these are the things she remembered. And it broke my heart when she said, "I hardly remember Christmas." Many of you in this room will be responsible for making this season a time of wonder for those we love. It takes an awful lot of doing to make that happen, right? Case in point, I spent last Monday on the internet buying gifts for all my kids and grandkids. And at the end of that shopping trip, I said, "So what has happened to the magic of Christmas?" As I placed my last order, I felt kind of disgruntled about the holidays. Have you ever noticed in our culture, we seem to take it as an article of faith that there was some unspecified time, a golden age of Christmas, when everybody was joyful, where expectations were not so high, the spirit of hospitality was not so low. This year, I'm already hearing people bringing a kind of innovative nostalgia to what they remember about the holiday season. And I have to say, I'm probably one of them after the story that I just told you. But complaining about this kind of old-fashioned Hallmark style Christmas that they feel has disappeared. And yet, with so much of this nostalgia, the truth is that there really was never any golden age of Christmas. No period where there was joyful relaxation as a uniform characteristic of the holidays. No time where all of us were on our best behavior. The truth is that no matter how much time and energy we put into this season, no matter how diligently we strive to get things just right, ultimately this season is going to be imperfect. And this, my friends, is actually really good news. Because rather than focusing on the perfect holiday season, if we already know that it's going to be imperfect, if we can lower our expectations of what it's going to look like, perhaps we can then reignite a sense of wonder. The Christmas story itself gives some really important clues about how we might do that. And so I ask you to suspend your cynicism, your possible cynicism, about whether or not that Christmas story is actually true, and see it instead in the light of it being an important myth of some important life lessons. Take a close look at the characters in that story. We start, first of all, of course, with a Jewish couple, Mary and Joseph, who are said to be of royal Davidian heritage, but of course they've been dispossessed by Roman rule. They struggle to find shelter for the birth of their first child. And what could be a more imperfect scenario to start this story? A woman giving birth, with all the mess and curse words that go along with giving birth. What if we could just respect the wonder of the birth of every human being with all the imperfections that brings, and simply acknowledge the incarnational aspect of each child being born, regardless of what kinds of circumstances that child finds itself in for that birth to take place. So we begin there with those three characters. And then there's the innkeeper, a man of the world, a businessman with his eye on his bottom line, telling this penniless couple, there is no room for you, while he saves space for his wealthier customers. He's a realist, after all. He's not an idealist, and it takes a lot to run an inn. He's simply taking care of business. He's taking care of his family. He's making sure there's fresh linen on all the beds. He's making sure there's enough firewood stacked to keep his paying customers comfortable. There's food in the kitchen, coats on his children's backs, and some money in the bank. And who can blame him? I can imagine that he was really pretty busy that night, cutting firewood, making people comfortable. So busy making preparations, in fact, that even though he had waited all of his life for something extraordinary to happen, when it actually did, he missed it. In fact, he probably hardly remembered that night. And then there are the shepherds, the very lowest tier of the social classes of that day. Night comes and coldness sets in on those hills. They've worked hard all day. They're dog-tired and bone-chilled, ready to call it quits for the night. Just wanting to have something warm to drink and some warmth to crawl into. And then all of a sudden there is this bright light, and out of the silent night comes a beating of wings. And it seems like a huge flock of birds, but then they hear singing. And they're filled with awe and wonder. And they tear off across those muddy fields, splashing through the sea of all those wings, the moonlight, the sheep, to see what the heck is going on. And then they see him in the manger, and they are filled with awe and wonder. And then, of course, there are the three wise men, the exact opposite of the shepherds. And you have to wonder why they have juxtaposed those two groups in this story. The very lowest caste of characters and the upper crust intelligentsia of the day. They detect a strange star during their studies. And knowing that this kind of sign is consistent with the birth of a very important person, usually royalty, they set off because they're curious. And they bring gifts just in case the newborn happens to be of royalty. They want to make sure that they're not entering someone's palace empty-handed. And so they grab their gold, frankincense, and myrrh to bring to the baby. But the star leads them instead to this humble manger scene. And they too are filled with wonder that this baby, lying here between this ragged man and woman, is evidently someone who is destined for greatness. Can you imagine how foolish they feel setting down those totally inappropriate gifts for that family? They depart, and they are changed by, and wiser still, because of this humble scene. Each year I read this story anew, I am reminded that, like the innkeeper, I will find my life interrupted by these holidays. And I will be tempted to be so incredibly busy preparing for what I think is most important. I'll want to pack in all the traditions that I fondly remember from childhood and even try a few new ones. All the while also trying to keep my eye on my budget that never seems to stretch enough. But what I really need is to be wise, like the astrologers, curious about what's going on around me, and ready to witness wonder, as the shepherds did that night. Many devout Christians celebrate this season of Advent by creating a stillness within for a time of reflection, renewal, and preparation for the coming light and the planting of hope. It is a hope grounded in the belief that each one of us is the face of God in this world, and that therefore we are the hands and the voices. And that is true even in the midst of our perfection. Christians reflect on the night of Jesus' birth as a thin place, the kind of encounter that can transform our spirits when we hear the story again, transform our minds and our hearts and our bodies. Perhaps the whole world is thin, but we're often too busy and too thick of heart to recognize it. When he was an old man, Einstein said, "Do not grow old no matter how long you live. Never cease to stand like curious children before the great mystery into which you are born." The important thing is not to stop questioning. It is enough if you try to merely comprehend a little of this mystery every day. Never lose holy curiosity. This holy curiosity, my friends, is at the heart of the Christmas story. It begins with the humble, imperfect, messy miracle of birth, and it ends in curiosity and wonder. Wonder is very childlike. Filling us with awe, we are alert to new experiences, mesmerized through our senses, the smell of cookies baking, the squeaky sound of new fallen snow under our feet, the delightful allure of a decorated Christmas tree, the magic of storefront elves and reindeer. Young children will learn to discover one thing at a time and use their senses one at a time, so that the tiniest detail will spark wonder. They're not hampered by the adult awareness of time or budgets. They're not bothered by the need to hurry. So the ability of a child to experience this kind of wonder does not require that we be a child. It only requires that we bring to each experience the eyes of a child. It only requires that we have the hearts of a child. And that requires a commitment to take the time to witness everyday wonder. So this morning, I send you forth in this Advent season with a charge to spend less time doing and more time being. I send you forth with a charge to settle for an imperfect Christmas or Hanukkah or winter solstice with imperfect loved ones. I send you forth with the charge to pause several times a day and imagine that what is right before you is something that you are seeing for the first time or perhaps the last time that you will ever see it. May this season truly be a time of seeing, touching, tasting, smelling, hearing, laughing, and loving all that brings a sense of wonder to your lives. May it be so, and blessed be.